All right. Thanks for joining me for an episode of Lessons in Lost Love and Resilience with Eric Housley. And I have a friend here today, Selena, that was introduced to me from somebody I grew up with. And Selena, I'm going to let you introduce yourself primarily. So then you have an opportunity to kind of tell us a little bit about your story and something that's happening in our country and that we need to be really aware of. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Eric. I am so honored by your introduction. I'm just happy to be here. I am happy to share my story, share the hope and resilience that some of the survivors have, and to be able to just, you know, educate yourself, persevere, and understand that it's happening in your backyard. That the girl
Yeah.
next door, the smart girl, the girl that you would never think to go and get into this type of work or industry, they're doing it
Mhm.
every day. And that is what I'm here to talk about and elaborate
No.
on.
Yeah, and I love it because, like a lot of my stories for grief and resilience end up being about the loss of a loved one. Yet grief can come in so many different ways, and then the resilience that goes with it on how you choose to stand back up and go. So if you want to explain in more detail, because I'll probably butcher it in terms of how to explain, but I know you ended up getting into the adult film industry and then there was some trafficking stuff. So what happened? Like, give me your background of your story.
So, my parents were, unfortunately, this is very statistical, but parents for children that do not have a father, especially a female figure, my parents got divorced very young. It was a very tumultuous relationship. There was a lot of violence, there was a lot of yelling, there was a bit of drugs involved. With all of that kind of in my atmosphere growing up, I didn't necessarily have boundaries and I didn't know how to say no. So very young, at age of 8, I had a family member, molest me, and it's taken a long time for me to even outwardly say that for fear
Mhm.
that retribution from family members, even though it's been a long time since I've been in that industry and I've been on drugs or anything of that nature, there's stigma that's associated with
Mhm.
it, and there's stigma associated with 8-year-olds that
Mhm.
are praying to adult men. That's sick. That's not
Mhm.
true. How does an 8-year-old sexualize towards an adult man? It's not an
Mhm.
8-year-old fault. And
Mhm.
so it wasn't portrayed as my fault, but it wasn't portrayed as anyone really gave a damn. Both of my
Mhm.
parents were very busy trying to develop financial responsibility, learning how to take care of a child. They had to utilize whatever resources they had at that time. And at that time, it was a family member and had to go back. I think I learned then that, it was only me and I couldn't trust anybody else, especially my family. And I think that was a hard lesson at 8. And that type of growth pattern and that type of cognitive repetitiveness, you see patterns in my life as I move forward.
Yeah, I want to say I heard recently, and because you're also in, the side of now helping people that we'll get into later. So correct me if this statistic is wrong, but I wanted to say I heard that 1 in 4 people have had some sort of sexual abuse in their
Yes.
life. Usually, and I'm thinking, holy crap! Like the thought that 1 in every 4 children in a local elementary school class is, I mean, if you look at it just as simply as that number, and it's scary. It's really scary to see that that's what's happening in our country. And it used to be overlooked a lot more than it is now, but it's still.
And you're right. To add on to that statistic as well, 51% of a child's first molestation, sexual abuse, it's with a family member, an immediate family
Yeah.
member.
Yeah.
So you have to, as a parent, decide, you know, I love my family. I trust my family. I want them to be able to have sleepovers, but where's the boundary now? And
Right.
with Epstein and Diddy and all of these, sensationalized names and prostitution rings are being brought to light and everybody wants to help now. But it's
Mhm.
like, where were you 30 years ago when we needed those resources?
Yeah, absolutely. So this obviously took you down a certain road as, in your development. And so what happened as you became a teenager and how did that go? And what did that go? What direction did that take you?
So as a teenager, I was actually pretty dorky. I played orchestra all throughout college. It was definitely one of those things that helped me release a lot of the anger, frustration, sadness, that kind of thing. I got straight A's. I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I like to play games and read books. I like to escape. That was my escapism, was definitely books. And then I started looking up, the internet started to become popular when I was about 14. I think we got our first computer, and Craigslist was around at that time before it got busted for its prostitution ring. And there was a glamour shot studio that was right next to my dad's studio at that time. He owned his own company. And I asked my father, I was 16, if I could go get some glamour shots done for free. My dad said, yeah, take the car. I'll see you in an hour. And at that point, at 16, I had my second situation, I guess you could say, where the man was dressing me, he was propping me, giving me boas and pretty vests and things like that. And then it started to be like, okay, slowly take them off. Slowly take
Mhm.
off your shirt.
Mhm.
Slowly put the feather boa over your breasts.
Mhm.
Slowly take off your bra. And by, I would say, maybe 3 minutes into being almost fully nude, I realized what was going on. I grabbed my clothes and I ran out the door. And I went to
Mhm.
my dad's studio and I never told him. And I think
So
that that was
go ahead.
that was the other pivotal part that kind of formed that cognitive assumption that, this is what men want.
Yeah, the normalcy of it in your head, or at least that's the understanding. So after this event, you ended up getting into other areas that are obviously people can't even imagine their daughter that's in orchestra or a kid in orchestra down that road. What did that look like for you?
So it started off really easy. I had always wanted to be in that industry. We had this thing called a little black box back in my day, and it was a little converter that you would hook behind your cable box and you would get free pay-per-view. And I was exposed to pornography very young. I was exposed to pornography probably 7, 8 years old, and I was watching it on a nightly basis. I had this fantasy that women should look like that women should behave like that sex and orgasms and men should fawn over you. And I had this unrealistic idea of what intimacy was. And that
Mhm.
developed because of pornography. So instead of waiting for a boyfriend that I loved to give my virginity to, I was giving my virginity for sacks of weed and for money. And I was 18 and 19 years old and I was in college. I was a college girl. And by that point, by the time I turned 20, 21, I was done with college. I just wanted to sell myself for money. And so I went right into the adult industry and they gladly accepted me with open arms. We can say that.
Yeah. How did that transition then? So now you're in the adult industry, and then what happens?
So the adult industry is, I would say, 90% drug addicts, 75% organized crime. I was taken advantage of left and right. I was told that if I did more, if I opened my limits, then I would make more money. I was strangled by a producer who asked me to sleep with him, and I said no. And he said if I told my agent that he would kill me. I got to travel. I can't say that I didn't hate it. I got to travel. I got to meet a couple of celebrities whom I will not name. I got to meet some really beautiful souls who are no longer with us. And that sentence alone should say a lot. They're no longer with us. Statistically, most girls in my industry, they die from overdose, they die from suicide or from murder. That's it. And I only
Yeah.
have one friend left.
Yeah. So you ended up in the adult film industry, and then do I remember you telling me that ended up that you were taken out of country or you were trafficked in a way too. So how did that happen, or how did that come about?
So I was starting to dry up in the industry, and that means when you get shot out, that means that you basically have gone through all the producers and you are no longer a new girl or a new face. So I needed money, I needed work, and I was scrolling around on Backpage, which, Backpage also got busted for prostitution. There was a modeling opportunity for me overseas,
Mhm.
And I was really excited to be able to have this opportunity. They paid for everything, passport, bank account, everything. Little did I know when I showed up there that I was theirs 24/7. Um I ended up escaping with 2 other girls that I found, and we to the capital to seek asylum, but we were afraid we would get sent back home because we were working girls at that time, so they sent us an address, and the address was a brothel in Bleep City. The brothel was in the main part of the red light district, and that was the address they gave us to make money to fly back home, and that's what I had to do.
And so you raised enough money by working in the brothels to then get back to the United States.
Yes.
Okay. Now you're back in the US, and how did you where did you find yourself finally going down a path where it's time for change, or did you realize that, or was it still a while longer, or what happened?
I came back. What's funny about organized crime is that they will always hold a grudge.
Mhm.
And when I left that country with those other females, they told me that they would find me, and they did. And they did some really horrific things to me. And it took a long time to get back to where I am now from what they did to me.
Mhm.
And down, I started doing so many drugs. I was trying to kill myself. I was started using intravenous drugs, just trying to overdose. I didn't feel that I had any worth left. I felt that because my body had been shown all over the internet that I would never have a great career or a loving husband, a respectful husband, that anyone would find any worth in me. So there was a lot of suicidal ideology during that time, so much drug and alcohol use. I don't know how I'm alive. But 3 years later, I did get sober on April 4th, 2016, and that will be 10 years in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations.
I know. I still can't
Di
believe it.
was there somebody that inspired you that got you to decide to do it, or were you just like, "I'm done with this. I need to get clean and sober"?
I I made a deal with Jesus, and I was sitting there and I was close to my fate, and I was like, "Jesus, please let me find a husband and have babies and get my degree and fulfill all of these things that I want to fulfill in my life. This isn't what I want in my life. Like, I surrender to you. Please,
Mhm.
please help me." And he gave me everything.
That's awesome. And I know your story because we've spoken a couple of times. But now, so that's 10 years ago now that you became clean and sober.
Yes.
You are now married with children.
Yes.
And congratulations on that. And you got your degree, I believe, and you're helping in
Yes.
a way. So 10 years ago the clean and sober started, and then when did you meet your husband, and how did all that stuff kind of go?
I met my husband in church.
Nice.
Who would have
Nice.
believed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I met him in church. We took things slow. We both had similar backgrounds. We had our first son like 2 or 3 years later. We got married 2 years after meeting. It was
Hmm.
actually pretty nice because my dad was dying of cancer, and I had planned this very extravagant wedding, and it was going to be 75 people plus 200, and there was going to be under the twinkle lights, and nothing ever goes as you plan. God laughs when you plan
Yeah.
things. So my dad was dying of cancer, and he couldn't have a lot of people at the wedding. And
Mhm.
what was so beautiful was after the one of the resources that I used here in Tucson paid for the wedding. Everything. Catering, the place, the vineyard, everything, they took care of it. And as soon as my dad handed off me to my husband, he said, "She's yours now. I've got to go."
And that was a moment, obviously, that would just resonate to have that time to have him there for, with you and to give you away, especially after all that you'd been through in your life, to see now that you've kind of overcome in that way. you've since got your degree in therapy counseling. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I have a degree in psychology with an emphasis in healthcare and society. So I tend to do more outreach, crisis de-escalation, a lot of one-on-ones with people, case management. I'm really good at developing foundation, especially with survivors because I am one, and understanding some of the quirks that they may have that others don't
Uh-huh.
understand. And so I think that it's really useful to have peers that are trafficking survivors because no one really understands what we've been through unless you've been through it.
Right, right, for sure. So you're the majority of what you're focusing on is on men and women. I would assume that it's mostly women, but I would assume it's both that have been trafficked or in the sex industry and recovering and such.
Yes, I'm my best friend from the industry still calls me as a therapist. It's so
Yeah,
funny. I used to be known back in the day as the industry therapist, and I hated that because I just wanted to have fun.
yeah,
And, to this day, I am still considered a therapist to all my friends, but I'm just
yeah,
not like yet.
yeah. So, so now you're helping in. I don't. Can you discuss where you're at now, or is that okay?
So I currently am taking some time off. I actually found out that I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. So I have been taking off the last 4 to 5 months to get treatment and to
Okay.
get better and just,
Yeah. Take care of
yeah.
yourself for a little bit.
Yep.
Especially as a mom and the work that's going on at home and everything else. So I'm sure
That's right.
there's a lot going on. So no, that's it's amazing to see that you talk about people that get knocked down and get back up, just to see how many times you just got back up again and you got back up again and had that resilience, and then as time come, the faith that just came out. In some ways, came out of nowhere. That you finally just said, "Hey, I give myself to you," and to see that is pretty amazing to and inspiring for that matter for people that are going through this or that know someone that's going through this. There's a lot of people that I end up talking to that they've gone through some really tough things, and there's suicidal ideation and there's things that come through that you're going, man, is this a consideration, right?
Yeah.
So I can only imagine for people that have gotten in this industry, which is a very dark place to kind of find yourself, and how you found your way out and then found the love of your life, and all of a sudden, and then you have one son, or you have more kids than.
I have a 7-year-old little boy and a 5-year-old little girl.
Okay, so you got them both. If
Yes.
yeah, and
I'm
if they're
scared
like.
for both of them, honestly.
Well, I think, the difference is I look at it now with my son, and I think, gosh, the things that I was doing at 19, not to any degree towards what you were dealing with, but things that I was doing that were just stupid. Like you look at it now and go like, these were really bad ideas. So when he's now 22 and still, barely drinks and, like he's just not into that kind of stuff, I'm like, good for you.
Right?
Yeah, and I liken it somewhat to my wife and I being able to look at it and go like, is this what, like being honest with them and talking to them.
Uh-huh.
Let me ask you this: when you're working with people and acting as the industry therapist in a way, not licensed by means, but I tell people all the time in my speaking, I'm not a therapist, but I'm a category authority, right? I mean, that makes you are definitely a category authority in this kind of realm. What is it that you feel you bring the most to these people going through this? I mean, obviously that you've lived it, right? So you understand, or how do you approach each of them when they're talking to you and in these moments?
I always try to find one thing that we can agree on, or one thing that we have in common, or, a movie that we like, a genre of music we like. We both were trafficked in this city, or, like we both worked for this company, or
Mhm.
whatever have you, no matter how minute it is. Oh, you have your lip pierced? I actually have mine pierced too, but I took it out. Something like that. Just feigning that interest in them as a human. and not
Mhm.
them as a physical form. And then continuing to, and this sounds maybe silly, just not monotonous, but don't use a lot of inflection with your voice. Don't make a lot of fast movements because these girls and men are accustomed to one fast movement's a blow to the head.
Mhm.
Um, definitely trying to take out language that's biased towards the sex industry, which can be difficult because let's face it, a lot of people are. And never ever touching a survivor unless they let you, ever. Even if it
Yeah.
feels like the right moment to hug them, you have no idea what their body has been through, what sort of traumatic response their body is reciprocating right now. And,
Mhm.
there's a lot of soft techniques that you can use. And regardless if they're abrasive, if you maintain your stability,
Mhm.
they'll get stable alongside you to converse. Might take a couple times, but just
Yeah.
keep at it.
Yeah, it's funny. I tell people all the time, like I talk about the topic of what to say when you don't know what to say, right? So someone that's gone through the grief of losing a child is something I relate to just
Yeah.
immediately. But when you say not touching a survivor in that way makes it blows my mind in many ways because you would think as somebody who's again, you would think as someone who had been through that, like a warm embrace of just somebody that just is being open in your mind is helpful, right?
Yep.
And so I tell people all the time, I'm going, you look, usually people, when talking to somebody who's lost a loved one, they say what they would want to hear. So for me, if I were to turn to you and say, Selena, I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. He's with God now. She's with God now. You might agree to that. You also might be at a point that you're angry. You're angry with God in this moment. And so you're not ready for it. In 2 years, maybe you are, right?
Yep.
But you don't know that that's it. So to hear you say that, my thought would be is just thinking that they were so mistreated and abused to have a warm embrace, like it, with no intention would make sense, except it's like, oh my gosh, that's like the exact worst thing you could probably do. Right.
Yes.
And so that makes a lot of sense. It's, again, these are why these conversations are important to get people to discuss and to really understand that these things are happening in our country. What are some statistics? I would assume you know some of them is how what is, like so one in four children have been through some sort of physical abuse. And I would assume that's sexually or is it also just physical abuse like beating or
I read
sexual?
that it was sexual.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was going to say
I
that's the
read
way I
that it
read
was
that.
that thing. Yeah.
I read the same. And then how many people in the United States are like, usually we saw the movie and I don't remember, it was with Jim Caviezel where he went and an FBI agent based on a true story of that whole sex trafficking ring of children coming through Central America. I mean, how is this? I know it's happening in my own community where I live. I've heard of it happening. Like, what are the numbers or the statistics that are happening in our country of how common this is?
So the Institute of Shelter Care, Dr. Jean Albert, she says that we can never truly know what the amount or what the percentage is of the people that are being trafficked here in the United States. And it's due to a multiple things. If you're doing self-report, for example, people aren't always going to self-report that they're a sex worker. Or if they're not caught by a task force, an anti-task force, which is counted in that population, and they're still just working on Backpage and they haven't been caught yet, that's a population in and of itself that we're not counting. And then if you want to go to the dark web, where you have your serious fetishes and snuff and things like that, we don't even know how many millions, thousands, hundreds of thousands are being trafficked through the dark web.
Mhm.
So it's just like we could say 7%, and males are unfortunately a lot less because they seem to be more quarantined in the queer community. Theirs is more like 1 or 2%. But again, how is that a factual number if we really can't count every single
Mm.
person?
Right. Right. So it's just an assumption. And
Yep.
has that same doctor made any kind of suggestions of how prevalent this is. I mean, for example, when Hannah and I talk about it and people say, do you have any children? We usually answer with, yes, our son is 21.
Yeah.
He goes to school in England. And if they ever say, do you have any other children? My wife usually says, no, we lost our daughter, 7 or 8 years ago. I always say we lost our daughter in a mass shooting to make people realize like, oh shit, I've just met somebody who's been in a
Yeah.
mass shooting before, lost someone in a mass shooting, because it humanizes it, sadly, because this is part of our country. I guess the reason why I'm asking that is how common is this in every community in the country? I mean, there's always prostitution. I mean, it's the oldest, what do they say, the oldest actual occupation, right?
Mhm.
In the history. But I mean, sex trafficking and prostitution, while correlated, they're also different, right? I mean, because
So,
traffic.
it depends. So, if you are a prostitute and if you're working for yourself independently, which not many girls do, then they can consider themselves like self-employed prostitute, but
Mhm.
most of these girls don't have the ability to add or, get their high school diploma, and they may have mommy or daddy issues. We don't know, but they tend to gravitate towards pimps. And
Mhm.
so most prostitutes that you're going to see on the street, I would say 85 to 90% is being run by a pimp that's on the other corner.
Got it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just mind blowing to me that that you're seeing this and it's in our country. And even when you were saying that you were exposed so drastically to pornography at such a young age, and then again, now your brain is also seeing that this is normal. I mean, not to correlate the two, but there's some sort of it is they're seeing like the gaming systems and the things that kids are seeing now are so violent that their understanding of violence and the things that are happening are more normalized in their
Yes.
brains.
Yes, I had to get rid of Roblox about 3 months ago for my son. I found that there was a developer game on there that had simulated sex scenes with naked characters, and then we found a nice little game with Epstein's Island. The Epstein's Island with his house or whatever, completely detailed. Why is this in Roblox? Why aren't creators doing more to help our children?
Yeah.
This is how our children get caught, get trafficked, and they disappear. And
Yeah.
if we're all about like saving the children right now since Epstein came out, then do yourself a favor and start like watching screen time. Figure out what they're watching. Figure out who they're hanging out with. Figure out
Right.
what things they're into. Look at some of the videos because some of those Bluey videos, they have bad Bluey videos and they have curse words and they do naughty things on them and they are
Hmm.
on YouTube Kids. YouTube Kids.
Hmm.
So we really have to just be so careful as to what our
Right.
children consume and whom they're around. But at the same time, like me, I lived in the 80s. I was told to get out onto the block and come back at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Nobody cared about me during that time. I had 8 hours to go ride my bike and play in the desert.
Right.
So, what's the right boundary for
Right.
you and your children, and what works best to keep them safe?
Right. Well, especially, you know, the technological babysitter of an iPad or an iPhone type of a thing is so, you just have to be a lot more aware that what's really on there. I mean, and you just don't know. I remember in college when I was being introduced to the internet because it was still fairly new that people were able to get on it at the time. So this is in the mid 90s that a friend turns and he types in, whitehouse.com or something like that. And so we're sitting in communications class and I look over and I was like, what are you like looking at? And he's laughing because it was and I was like thinking, wouldn't that be the government? They're like, no, that's .gov. So it was like, oh my gosh, like this is stuff. And it was literally, there were no barriers, right? Where you could block
Yeah.
those things or make sure that they were covered. So no, it's a really, really good advice for people raising young children to not let that babysit them. I mean, I used to come home and I'd watch, every episode of I Love Lucy, Gilligan's Island, Three's Company, you name it. And there was a lot of really inappropriate sexual innuendo in Three's Company,
Oh,
but the
yeah.
thought the thought of that now compared to, like what these kids are exposed to. And so you can't just let them, like I used to go home, my parents were working. So I'd go home and I'd be watching TV and was never given much homework. So it was like, so that's what I would occupy
Yeah,
my time. So imagine when they're on Roblox and all of a sudden this thing comes up and then all of a sudden somebody has a way to communicate and then, their next thing they know, they're meeting a friend that they thought was
exactly.
someone else. So
Yep.
yeah, it's just such a scary road to go down. Well,
I mean,
Selena,
it's evolved, from
yeah,
me doing my photo shoot at 16 on Craigslist to Roblox targeting 6-year-olds. So I
right.
just my advice is parents, please be careful of what your children are consuming.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, you have such an inspiring story of resilience and to know that you're, like 2 weeks out of a 10-year sober journey. Congratulations on that. And glad that you've had this opportunity to find Christ in your life and the way that you've been able to turn it for good and helping others and raising children that are going to be aware of these things to keep them on a different path. We've started something with Elena's Voice Foundation called Elena's Bridge. And the idea is to, instead of only helping victims of violence, this is to go to get violent offenders that are just on the wrong path to try to guide them back the wrong way because today's offended are tomorrow's offenders,
I
right? So
love that.
the
That is
thought of,
wonderful.
so it's pretty exciting because I mean, similar to what you're doing is your children seeing you on a better path and knowing your story down the road. I'm sure you haven't explained it at this point at seven
I'm
and five.
afraid.
Oh, I'm sure. At the same time, these are things that are real that I mean, who knows? What if your daughter ends up becoming an attorney and fighting for justice for women that have been in this or your son or I mean, these are things that they're inspiring to see that you overcame something. And however you got to where you got, that's your story, right? That's your past and this is how you're moving forward with it. You got back up and so just amazing kudos to you to be able to do that and I appreciate you coming on and spending a little time with me talking about it. So thanks
Yeah,
for
of
coming on.
course. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Selena. Bye.
Bye.